What's up, PGF Nation? Today, we're breaking down the 5 most improved teams in the NFL this offseason. Not the teams that just won the headlines, but the ones that actually got better. Because every year, there are a few teams that go from irrelevant to a serious problem. I'm Brad Fowler. He's Alex Higdon. Alex, let's kick this off. Who's your pick for the most improved team in the NFL this offseason?
Well, if I pick the Raiders, Brad, everybody's going to say I'm a homer. So I'm not. I'm going to say it's the Browns so that nobody goes crazy on this. But the Browns, in free agency, they had Elton Jenkins, Zion Johnson. They trade for Titus Howard, bring in the Jets, Quincy Williams. And then they go into the draft. And I'll just mention a few names: Casey Concepcion, Denzel Boston, Spencer Fano, and Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. I think just with those 8 players, their team has got immensely better. However, when we look at the team as a whole, we're still stuck with the same question that they've been having basically ever, with the exception of 1 year when they had Baker Mayfield. Who was the quarterback?
Yeah, I like the idea of this team building the roster up and having it ready for their quarterback. I don't think it's such a terrible game plan, right? A lot of times we see bad teams pick at the top of the draft. They take a quarterback number 1 or number 2 overall. They've got a roster that has all kinds of holes, and you throw this rookie into a tough situation. I mean, we've seen that how many times over the years of watching NFL football. And I think the one thing I'll give Cleveland a lot of credit for is they've done a really nice job of knowing, okay, you know what? This year is not the year for the quarterback unless they catch lightning in a bottle. Maybe Shador takes a big step forward. Maybe Dylan Gabriel from last year. Maybe one of these guys breaks out. But you give them a chance to start and see who wins that job. See if, like I said, one of them surprises you, great. If they don't, now you've got a team that you've built up and is ready for that quarterback next year. And once again, what looks like a deep quarterback draft. So they spent a lot of money on the O-line. Now, I got to give them credit because they needed to.
They lost basically their whole O-line in the free agency.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think they upgraded. Like you said, Zion Johnson's a good player. One of the best run blocking guards in the NFL. Elton Jenkins, very good pass blocking.
From
Titus Howard, right. Veteran
yeah.
Right tackle. Todd Monken's coming in here. He's going to want to build kind of a run-heavy, play-action type of scheme. Spencer Fano, I think, was a great selection for them because you get a guy who's a versatile offensive lineman. This guy played left. He played right. There's a lot of people that believe he could kick inside if needed. So now you kind of have a guy that you can put wherever your weakest spot is, right? You can kind of move him around the line if you need to. Hopefully he's a long-term solution at one of the tackle spots, but if not, he probably is a starter somewhere. Casey Concepcion gives you some juice, do-it-all weapon, a return guy, a slot guy with some real speed. Denzel Boston, true X receiver, gives you a vertical presence. I like the pairing of those 2 receivers. Guys that do different things, kind of a big target guy and a quick guy that can really open things up underneath. Austin Barber, who they've got in the draft as well, another offensive tackle later in the draft. Nice depth piece, kind of a developmental offensive tackle. So I like that pick as well. And like we talked about, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, this guy had a first-round grade. For most of us, we thought he was a late first-round pick. Where they got him was great value, a guy that has the ability to take the ball away, a good run defender. So I think the defense certainly got better. The offense certainly got better. This team really could make a jump this year. Now, look, they're not going to be probably in the playoffs or making any real noise. We're talking about the most improved teams here, right? They're talking about a team that was picking in the top 10 that might, win 5 or 7 games next year and take a step forward. And like I said, be ready for their quarterback next year. I feel like they've fixed almost everything except the most important position, but it feels like this roster is going to be ready for that quarterback next year.
Yeah, and I guess at the end of the day, just to wrap this up, a lot of this is going to be a matter of, because at the point where Kevin Stefanski left, he was a strong coach. Those guys played for Kevin Stefanski, even though they were in always going to be at the top of the draft, with the exception of the 1 year. Actually, the 2 years, one with Baker and then the other with Joe Flacco for the most part, but they played for him. So he was a proven coach that those guys rallied around. So we'll have to see with everything they have if the coaching can match what they have defensively, and then let's see what he can do offensively. I'll say this, my second team for the hope of the PGF fans. But the Raiders are second. They add Jalen Naylor, Tyler Linderbaum, Kirk Cousins, Kwity Paye, Quay Walker, and Kobe Dean. They trade for Teron Johnson. And then they also get Max Crosby back from the Ravens trade. And then they add Fernando Mendoza, Traydon Stukes, Trey Zoom, Mike Washington, and Kieran Crawford. And then they, made sort of a steal with Gerard McCoy. We'll have to wait and see on that. So I like, again, I said previously, this is probably the first time I've liked where our GM and our coach at the same time. Before, it's always been one or the other, mainly the other. But I can say for the first time, they look like something. I don't know what yet, but they do look like something.
I think if nothing else, they immediately raised the floor for this franchise from what they were last year going into this year. Will it translate to wins? I don't know, but I think you can say this is a better team on paper, certainly.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think, like you said, you not only do you get the number one pick, Fernando Mendoza, there's a lot of hope for him to develop into hopefully a high-level starter for them. Let's not forget maybe the biggest upgrade. And look, we're going to have to wait and see, but on paper, Clint Kubiak looks like a home run hire.
Yeah, he does.
So, going and getting Clint Kubiak, we know this guy has a track record of success in the NFL, comes from the Shanahan, the Kubiak, the McVay kind of lineage, the system that has taken over the NFL. This guy is going to bring it in. We know he's going to want to run the ball. We know he's going to want to have balance. So I love a lot of the additions they made. Tyler Linderbaum, look, they paid a lot of money for Tyler Linderbaum, but you get really the prize, crown jewel of this free agency class was Linderbaum. You're talking about a top 3 center in the NFL in his prime. And let's face it, the reason this is so important too was because they knew they were going to go get Mendoza. You go get a high-level center to not only to protect him, but to take something off his plate. What I mean by that is Linderbaum will handle the protection calls. Linderbaum has that veteran presence. He's going to take that off of Mendoza's plate. And in this type of offense, you want the center making the calls up front, especially for a young quarterback. So that might be an overlooked piece to this, that now you can let your quarterback, it can kind of speed up his processing. That's one less thing he has to worry about when he comes up to the line. Like you said, Max Crosby returning was huge because those draft picks would have been great, but I don't know. Are you going to find a Max Crosby with either one of those picks? Probably not. I'm talking about one of the best defensive players in the league. And now he's coming back with some of the pieces that you mentioned that they added in free agency. Look, like I said, Tyler Linderbaum's kind of the home run free agent, but they added some nice depth pieces in free agency as well. Some guys that, like I said, are going to raise the floor. And I love their draft, man. Traydon Stukes, I know you're not as high on him as I am, but I think he's a phenomenal player. Kieran Crawford, like you mentioned, I think he's a high upside guy with some really nice traits. Gerard McCoy, like you mentioned, take a flyer on him. Why not at that point? Yeah, there's the medical concerns, but when you're getting them in the 4th round, there's no risk involved to take a guy that had first-round talent. We both love Mike Washington. This guy's a big-time running back. I thought he was the second best running back in this draft. Where they got him was awesome value. And now you can pair him up with Dasson Genti, who took last year. Now you have a 2-headed running back combo behind a better offensive line and a more capable quarterback, whether it's Kirk Cousins or Mendoza. Look, Kirk Cousins is another kind of overlooked factor here. Not only do you bring him in, it takes a lot of pressure off Mendoza to not have to start right away. And even if Mendoza does start, you have a veteran presence in the quarterback room that knows this system. So at the very least, he's going to be able to learn from Cousins, if nothing else. It's hard not to get excited about a team that's got a more stable offensive line, a more balanced run game, a deeper defense. Look, they didn't fix everything, but they fixed enough. They absolutely fixed enough for this team to be headed in the right direction for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now we have the New York Football Jets at the moment. Now, what I'll say here about the Jets is there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on with the Jets before we get into who they added, who they didn't add, and where they were going. But there's a lot going on with the coaching and everything before you can even get into the plays. But right now, we're just simply talking about what's on paper. So they add Dylan Parham. They bring in, Geno Smith, David Oneonta. They trade for Tavondre Sweat. They bring in Demario Davis. They bring in Nashawn Wright. They trade for Minka Fitzpatrick. And then on top of that, they also trade for they also draft Omar Cooper. They also draft David Bailey. They also draft D'Angelo Pons. They also draft Darrell Jackson. So what I can say,
you didn't even mention Kenyon Sadiq, tight end one.
yeah, I'm sorry, Kenyon Sadiq. I forgot about Kenyon Sadiq, and they also had Kenyon Sadiq, and for kicks and giggles, they also had K. Klubnik, but we won't talk about him. But for what they've added on this team now, we know the one thing that they have firm on this team is they have a good offensive line. That's one thing we can say. Shut down everything. They have a good offensive line. So and their young players, I think what's his name? Olu is going into his third year. You have Armand going into his second year. So these guys are young. They're signed. So they'll have at least 2 more years to practice not to practice, but to play with these players and this offensive line set the way that it's set. Now, I believe they have the players that can work. I like their draft. I like the players they added. I know some of them are old, but that's veteran leadership. And they're only 1 year. They're only 1 year players. I believe they have the players to make this work. The true overall question is, do they have the coaching, and will that coaching be here a year from now? Because I think now they have 3 first-round picks next year. So some way, shape, or form, they're going to get a quarterback. We know they're going to get a quarterback in the first round. So we could throw that out the window. So now you're going to have your quarterback, you have your weapons, you have your offensive line, you have your defense, you're ready to rock. The only thing I think looking at next year is who's going to be coaching this team.
Yeah, I think there is some pressure on Aaron Glenn because we weren't 100% sure if he was going to be coming back for this season. He was on the hot seat after what was a really, really rocky first year in New York. So you're right. I don't think they need to win a lot of games necessarily, but they need to show ownership that they're moving in the right direction, right? They need to at least be looking like, hey, the rebuild is on the right track. Because if this thing starts looking like last year where they don't look very competitive and it looks like a lot of these moves aren't making sense, or if a lot of these draft picks don't look like they're living up to their potential, then they're going to really start to be some question marks about this coaching staff. And you're right. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out and how much patience Woody Johnson has, because we know in the past he hasn't always been the most patient owner. But you're right. On paper, New York Jets, it's hard not to like what they did, especially in the draft. I think the draft's where they really killed it. Obviously, David Bailey led college football in pressures. I think he's a guy that instantly gives that pass rush some juice. You mentioned Kenyon Sadiq. I mean, the guy is just a vertical mismatch at tight end that they have lacked for I don't know how long, of just a big-time player that's going to give whoever is playing quarterback a real weapon in the middle of the field. Omar Cooper, just a physical wide receiver too, that really is going to complement Garrett Wilson. D'Angelo Pons, look, we all know about the size, being an undersized guy, but man, he's so good in coverage. It's hard to think that he won't work at the next level. Some of the veteran guys they added, I don't know how much these guys really give you at this point in their career, but I think you hit on something. They do add some veteran leadership. Guys like Demario Davis, Minka Fitzpatrick, they're kind of past their prime, Joseph Asai, but they'll give you something, right? I think the most important thing is that they maintained cap flexibility. They didn't panic spend. They didn't overspend. It was a lot of cost-effective deals that allows them to have some flexibility moving forward. So I think that was important, because I do think they want to build this team through the draft, young players that they can create building blocks with. And you're right. How many teams picking at number 2 have bookend tackles that look like starters for the next 10 years, right? Like you mentioned. So there's definitely a lot more to work with than most bad teams. This isn't a flashy rebuild so far in New York. It's just a smart rebuild. Like I just think they're making smart moves right now. And it's going to be really interesting to see with all those draft picks next year and what kind of happens going into next year's draft, to kind of see what they do with those picks. Obviously, quarterback's going to be something they're going to target, but this is an interesting football team. Like, this is a team that I think could really improve next year with all the moves they've made. So they're going to be a fun team to watch. What about the other New York team, Alex? Because they made our list too here.
Well, the other New York team, the New York Giants. Now, I know me and you differ on some of the picks that they made. But I'm going to bring up a player. But I'm going to go through through what they've done between free agency and the draft, and then we're going to talk about one player, and it's not Orville Reese. So the Giants, they bring in Darnell Mooney, they bring in Daniel Falele, they bring in Isaiah Likely, they actually brought in DJ Reader today. They bring in Tremaine Edmonds to round out the team, and then they go and they draft Orville Reese, who they're going to play at middle linebacker, so they say. They bring in Francis Mayoga, they bring in Colton Hood, and they bring in Malachi Fields. Now, the question I have for you is, we talked about them drafting somebody at 10. And we said, if you're going to move him there, why not just go get Ione, who's the best player there, instead of drafting him and moving him there? And they have moved him. Right now, he's playing guard. He's not playing tackle. He's playing guard. Right. So what do you think about that?
I mean, it's an interesting pick, man. It really is, because like we talked about, we would have liked for them to take Caleb Downs at that spot. We thought it was a little bit head scratching just because we thought, look, Caleb Downs was just a better player. But if they were thinking that offensive line was more important, then that's okay. I don't hate it. I just didn't understand, like you said, if you knew you were going to move him to guard, why not go get the best guard in this class? Now, maybe they see some position versatility with Francis Mauigoa. That could be. Maybe they wanted a guy that they could kick outside if needed. That is probably the only thing that really makes sense here. Obviously, the Orville Reese thing, we disagree on that, but it's regardless of how we feel about him, he's a high impact guy potentially, and a guy that I think offers a lot of versatility. So it'll be interesting to see how they use him, because I think he is going to be a little bit of a positionless chess piece. If you go back and look at what Harbaugh has done historically with his time in Baltimore, he really liked these types of players, guys that you can really move around and have different roles, give quarterbacks a lot of things to think about pre-snap. And I think a guy like Orville Reese does that for sure. I think Colton Hood was a sneaky good pick in the draft.
Yeah, that was a really good pick. That was a really good pick.
I think it was good value where they got him. He's a really good corner. He's a ball hawk. Tremaine Edmonds in free agency, I think, is a high upside linebacker replacement for them. When you pair him up with Orville Reese, the linebacker position in New York has been neglected for I don't know how long, going all the way back to like Eli Manning's prime. I mean, it's been a long time since New York's had some real guys in the middle. And we know that's something that Harbaugh values, and they immediately upgrade the middle of this defense, which I like. Greg Newsome, I thought, was kind of a low-risk move that I like. They bring in, this is not going to get talked about a lot, but Jordan Stout, the punter, is an elite punter. And look, Harbaugh has a special teams background. That's some place where they're going to improve. It's not going to get talked about. I think Isaiah Likely was one of the best free agency moves that just isn't getting talked about that much. This is a good player. This is probably one of the most surprising players that Baltimore didn't re-sign. I was really surprised that he was not a part of their future plans, and I think he's going to be an instant impact player for them. Malachi Fields, look, I like the player. I would not have taken him where they took him. I think there was better wide receivers on the board. However, similar to the Mauigoa pick, just because he wasn't who I would take there, I do think he does add something to this football team, because now you have a 6'4" physical red zone threat, which I think is good for your young quarterback. The biggest addition to the Giants is John Harbaugh. Let's be real here, because nothing against Brian Daboll, but he was building kind of a finesse team that was kind of built on speed. Who does Daboll go and get instantly when he joins the Titans? He go gets Wan'Dale Robinson. Give me a break. Yeah. Harbaugh doesn't want guys like that on his roster. Harbaugh comes in now. He is a program builder, a culture shifter, and I like the staff that Harbaugh put together. I think Matt Nagy at offensive coordinator was a really good hire. Denard Wilson at defensive coordinator. Brian Callahan, coach the quarterbacks. Greg Roman, look, we can talk about his limitations as a play caller, but if he's going to coordinate your run game, that's a pretty good guy to have on your staff. So I really like what the Giants have done. I think they're going to be disguise heavy on defense. I think they're going to give you a lot of multiple looks. And I think this offense is going to shift gears to a more physical bully ball approach up front. So, I think this team, what they really lacked more than anything was structure and identity. And I think it shows all over the place this offseason.
So let me ask you, when you talk about being bully ball, who's going to run the ball? Because I think with them missing out on Jeremiah Love and then not drafting I don't believe they drafted. Yeah, they didn't draft a running back. So, and Cam Scatterbull, who knows when he's going to be back, and he's, respectfully, he's another injury waiting to happen with his running style. Are we talking about Tracy here?
Tyrone Tracy flashed his rookie year. I thought he had a really nice rookie season.
Yeah.
Scatterbo was having a really good rookie season before the injury. Hopefully he comes back. They probably would have liked to add a running back, but it wasn't the draft for that, and when Jeremiah Love goes a couple picks before you, then it really left the board empty where there just wasn't a guy that was in the right position for them. So I actually credit them for not trying to reach on a running back in a class that didn't have a lot of good ones and just say, you know what, we'll go with what we got. You can't fix every roster hole in one draft or in one offseason, right? You just try to fix all the ones you can, and you can address it next year if you feel like you need to. But I think there's enough guys back there that they'll be okay, but it's probably something they're going to focus on next year. I think you're right. Quick shout out to our friends at props.cash, the best player prop research tool in the game. Props.cash lets you scan thousands of props across sports books to quickly spot the highest value opportunities. You get real-time injury and lineup intel, advanced filters to find exactly what you're looking for, and even correlated player props so you can see what tends to hit when a player goes over their line. They cover NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, college football, college basketball, and the WNBA. It's legit next level prep. If you're serious about betting smarter, go to props.cash and use code PGF25 for 25% off your first month. That's code PGF25 for 25% off your first month at props.cash. The official ticketing app of Pint Glass Football is now SeatGeek. I can't recommend them enough, guys. I've been using SeatGeek for years. You want to go to a game this season? SeatGeek is here to take the confusion out of buying tickets, making sure you get the best seats at the best prices. With SeatGeek, you'll never have to worry about overpaying for tickets again. How? They put a 0 to 10 score on each ticket, so you know you're getting a good deal. But here's the real game changer. You can get $20 off your first ticket purchase with the code PGFPOD. That's right, $20 off with code PGFPOD. This season, make every game day epic with SeatGeek. Download the SeatGeek app and remember to enter the code PGFPOD to grab your $20 discount.
Okay, so lastly, in terms of when we're going depth, we'll just mention the other ones. You actually, soft introduced this team by talking about Wan'Dale Robinson, but we'll talk about the Titans, who signed Cordell Vonson, a guard. They signed Wan'Dale Robinson. They signed John Franklin Myers from Denver, and they trade for Jermaine Johnson. They bring in Alontae Taylor, and they also bring in Cordell Flott. Then they turn around, and they draft Carnell Tate, bring in Kendrick Fault, and they bring in Anthony Hill. I actually like the draft, at least the 3 draft picks that I mentioned, and I'm not upset about what they did in terms of free agency. Wan'Dale Robinson, I understand what you said, but coming here, he's more going to be he gets to kind of fall back into his slot role, so he'll be the third receiver with them having Calvin Ridley, and then you bring in Jermaine Johnson and John Franklin to upgrade the defensive line, and hopefully, perhaps Jermaine Johnson ends up being the pass rusher that they thought he could be. They thought he could be with the Jets.
Yeah, and look, he was with Saleh in New York, so obviously that fits. Wan'Dale Robinson was with Dayball, also in New York, but with the Giants, of course. So I think these are guys that they're familiar with the system. They're going to know the playbook. They know what kind of guy they're getting. So I like those moves. I do. I mean, I joke about the Wan'Dale Robinson thing, but truth be told, you just needed to get some guys around.
They need to get better. They need to get better.
Right. So you go get Carnell Tate. I think it was a reach. We talked about it, on our first round recap. I think Carnell Tate was a reach, but I understand going and getting a wide receiver for your own quarterback. So now you've got a guy with wide receiver 1 upside. He's got a lot of vertical ability to get down the field and make some big splashy plays for a guy like Cam Ward who likes to go deep. And the one guy you didn't mention is Nicholas Singleton, the running back out of Penn State, who they got later. I think that was a really good value pick. I mean, this guy's a home run hitter. He's a really good athlete. I think now at the very least, you add some depth in the running game. Keldrick Falk, boomer bust player that we talked about, but where they got him, I think is, eliminates some of the risk because they got him at the very end of the first round. My big thing with him was when all the mock drafts had him in the top 15. That's when I was saying, okay, let's pump the brakes here a little bit on Keldrick Falk. But you get him at 31 or 30 or wherever it was they got him. I think it was right at the back half. They traded back in, if I'm not mistaken, to the back half of the first round to get him. At that point, okay, makes a little bit of sense. If they can kind of unlock his upside, which, look, Robert Saleh is one of the best defensive minds in the NFL. If there's anyone that could do it, it's Robert Saleh. So, if he's a guy that could become a boom player or not a bust player, that would be huge for them. Anthony Hill Jr., I thought was really good value where they got him. This is a guy who's rangy. He's got good length. He can get downhill. I like some of the moves they made defensively. Cordell Flott is a guy that they also got from the Giants.
Slot corner. Yep.
And he's a good player. And he's one of the guys that I was actually pretty surprised that the Giants allowed him to leave the building because I think he's a sneaky under the radar addition. Monte Taylor, press cover. So you immediately upgrade the secondary. You mentioned John Franklin Myers, 14 and a half sacks the last 2 years. That's a lot of sacks for a guy in the middle of the defense. So now you pair him with Jeffrey Simmons. You've got a pretty nasty defensive tackle duo up front. This was a team that clearly kind of had a vision for what they wanted to do this offseason, what kind of team they wanted to build. And I think there was clearly an alignment between scheme and personnel. And that's the one thing I'll say that matches perfectly with their offseason. So I think this is one of the most intentional rebuilds on this list. So, Alex, we've got our top 5 most improved teams this NFL offseason. Who are some honorable mentions, some teams that just missed the cut here?
So I'll throw out a team, and I'll throw Arizona in there. Now, people are probably laughing because Arizona's been struggling for the past few years. They finally got Kyler out of there, but they go and they grab Jeremiah Love, Chase Basante, and they also draft Carson Beck, by the way. They also signed Tyler Algiers. I'll mention Devin Duvernay. They stuck a couple of wide receivers in there, and they also get Isaac Samula from the Steelers, who was actually previously with the Eagles, who I think is a solid guard. Now, I think with what the Cardinals have done and what they wanted to do, they wanted to get a tackle, but they were too high and nobody would trade down with them. So understood. But what they did was I think I believe that they hit a bunch of doubles here. I don't think they knocked anything out of the park, and they're going to be able to do some things with the improved offense, with the improved offensive line, and I guess the fringe start of Gardner Minshew and the other quarterback who's actually asking for more money, and perhaps Carson Beck. So I don't think that they may only win 5 games, but I think they'll at least be in a fight with a lot of teams.
This is a team that probably just missed the cut, but because I think they did do a nice job of upgrading this roster, though, like you mentioned. Isaac Sabulo, veteran interior offensive lineman, Tyler Algier, probably one of the more under-the-rated running backs in the NFL. A guy that's really kind of just been in the shadow of Bijan Robinson the last couple of years. But this was a guy his rookie year that showed he can be an every down back, and he can be a guy that can lead a backfield. Still a young guy. I think still has some juice left in the tank. Kendrick Bourne, wide receiver on a 2-year deal. I like adding a wide receiver 3 to what they already have. Devin Duvernay, wide receiver, kick returner, probably more value as a special teams guy. But they made some nice moves here and had some nice draft picks as well. We mentioned Tyler Algier, but you go and get Jeremiah Love. You're probably one of the best running back prospects we've seen in the last couple of years. And if they can get the quarterback position right, once again, like we keep saying over and over again, there's going to be a lot of quarterbacks potentially in this next draft. So this will be a team to watch that if they can fill that position, maybe they take a big step forward next year.
Another team that could have made the list but didn't make the list is the New Orleans Saints. Now, they brought in David Edwards. They also brought in Noah Fant. Who cares? But they also brought in Caden Ellis, the middle linebacker that was in Atlanta. They also traded with us. They got Tyree Wilson. We never know. You never know. And they then they go and they draft Jordan Tyson. They bring in Kristen Miller. They bring in also Oscar Delp. Keep an eye on that name. And they bring in Bryce Lane, a wide receiver. Again, another team. I didn't think they hit home runs, but I thought they hit a couple of well, they hit a bunch of doubles and maybe a triple in the draft.
Yeah,
I'll say this.
Etienne.
I'll say this though, and and they did bring in Travis Etienne. I don't like the Jordan Tyson. I don't like the Jordan Tyson pick, and I feel that it's gonna hurt them literally and figuratively when both of those receivers go down at some point. But go ahead.
Yeah, that one. So I'm hearing more and more stories now that the Chiefs were very concerned that Mansour Delane, who was the number one player on their board, they were very concerned that the Saints and or possibly the Commanders would take Mansour Delane ahead of them. And that's why they got aggressive to get in front of them to get their guy. I think when they made that move, I do think it left the Saints, forced them to kind of pivot to their next option, which was, okay, if we can't get our top corner, then let's go attack the offensive side of the ball and get one of these receivers. I mean, look, Jordan Tyson, when he's healthy, is probably the best wide receiver in this class. I mean, the guy is a dynamic playmaker. I know he was your number one wide receiver. It's just the injury concerns. I mean, that really is the only story with this guy. He just misses a lot of time. And I've said it a million times on this pod. I'll probably say it a million more, but guys who have injury concerns in college typically don't magically start getting healthy in the NFL. That's usually just not how it works. So it was a risky pick at 8. I just thought this is a guy that, look, if he's healthy, he could be great, but I'm with you. If he gets hurt, your fan base is going to be really frustrated with this pick because this wasn't like a secret. It's not like we didn't know this guy had injury concerns. That's really been the big storyline around him going into this draft. So because of that, he's kind of a boom or bust player in a lot of ways based on his availability. But I'm with you, Christian Miller, penetrating interior defensive lineman, a guy who can push the pocket. This wasn't a very good defensive tackle class, right? This was probably one of the weaker DT classes we've seen in the last couple of years. So I understand, like, you kind of felt like, look, we got to get one of these guys before they're gone because it's going to dry up quick. So I understood that pick, even if he's not a probably high impact starter for them. I think like Oscar Delp I think he is a sneaky key tight end in this class who has a lot of upside. I mean, he's really athletic. He was really underutilized in Georgia's offense, and he's a guy that's going to be fun to see how he develops. I think Bryce Lance in the 4th round might be a sneaky pickup. This is a guy with some developmental upside. He's got some size. Lorenzo Styles Jr. in the 5th. That could end up being a really nice value pick for them in the 5th round. He's a versatile safety. So I think overall, pretty nice draft in free agency. Filled some holes here. David Edwards at guard, I think stabilizes the interior. Noah Fant at tight end, like you said, whatever. But I mean, I guess it gives you some depth at tight end. But Caden Ellis is a guy I want to mention. Good player. He was a full-time starter in Atlanta. Comes in and replaces the hole left by Demario Davis. So I think they've done a nice job this offseason. It's been a minute since we've seen the Saints really be relevant. They're starting to feel like they could be a team that could make a little noise this year.
Yeah, and before we move on from them, I will say bringing in David Edwards, I think that was the last and final piece because their offensive line is young. They have Kelvin Banks, David Edwards, Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, and Talis Fuaga from 2 years ago. That offensive line could possibly be the best offensive line in football next year. And they have not traded Alvin Kamara yet, nor have they released him yet. So if you're telling me you're going to give me Travis Etienne and Alvin Kamara behind that offensive line, and you're going to, let's just say they start using some 13 and 14 personnel with Jawan Johnson, Noah Fant, and Oscar Delp, I think that Kellen Moore has a few things up his sleeve that we're going to be able to see this year. And again, I don't see them jumping up above the Buccaneers, but I do see them fighting. And we'll see if they come in last place. Last but not least, Brad, we have the Miami Dolphins, who basically just drafted everybody that they could. So I'll say this: they brought in Malik Willis, they brought in Lonnie Johnson, they brought David Ajabo, a guy, guy drafted by the Ravens in the 2nd round, who had he not popped his Achilles would have been a 1st round pick. So we'll have to see. We won't, but we'll have to see how good he is there. But then they kind of go crazy in the draft. And what I mean by crazy is that they drafted so many players. So they draft Caden Proctor, a guy that me nor you like at all. Then they come back, they draft Chris Johnson. They also draft Chris Bell, Caleb Douglas, Kevin Coleman. They do draft Jacob Rodriguez. They also drafted Trey Moore and Kyle Lewis. So they have a lot of young players. Now, it's going to also depend on the defensive coordinator from Green Bay to see if he can pull all of this together and get these guys to get the most out of these guys, because it is a lot of young players and they really basically don't have any veteran players on this team. They kind of moved on from everybody. So you have a lot of young players. You have a brand new coach, a young coach. We're going to have to wait and see if he can rally all these guys, pull them all together. They have Kenneth Grant from last year who needs a kick in the butt to get himself started up again. But they have a lot of young players, and they're going to have a lot of young players next year because they have the two first round draft picks, or maybe, I'm sorry, just one first round draft pick, where they're going to go and get their quarterback that's going to perhaps try and come in and wrangle all these guys together as well.
Yeah, and we knew this was going to be a team that was going to be heavily focused on rebuilding through the draft, because basically their GM came out and just said, look, free agency, I'm not going to quote him, but he basically just said free agency is not what he believes in at all when it comes to building a roster. And look, I can't completely disagree with his comments. I think you get your building blocks to a great team through the draft. I think you have to patch holes with free agency. And I think that's what they did here for the most part, because they did focus on, looked at 13 picks. I thought they did a nice job kind of maneuvering the board. Like you said, neither one of us are really high on Caden Proctor. He has a ton of upside. So if he can unlock that ability, keep his weight under control and develop, he certainly could turn into a high-level player. But there's a reason he was on our boom or bust list, because there's a lot of red flags with him. At pick 12, I didn't like it. I thought there was way better players available. But they did rebound at pick 27 and pick 43 with Chris Johnson, the cornerback out of San Diego State, who we both really like. I think he is an impact player day one as a starter. And Jacob Rodriguez, the linebacker at Texas Tech. This guy's athletic. He's instinctive. He is a big-time player in the middle of the defense. Caleb Douglas, didn't like this pick at all. Not that I disliked the player. I just thought it was a reach. I did not see him as a top 75 player in this draft. I thought he'd be available, honestly, in the 5th round. So that to me was a big reach. But Chris Bell at pick 94, I really like. The only downside to this pick is that he's coming off the injuries, and you've got this quarterback that you brought over in Malik Willis, and now you don't really have, you wanted to add some wide receivers. I get that. I just don't know how soon he's going to be ready to go, even though, man, he has got a ton of upside. I love Chris Bell when he's healthy and motivated. He is a big-time player. So where they took him, I don't mind that pick at all, and I love the Kyle Lewis pick at pick 138. You want to talk about adding some linebacker / safety, a guy who's probably going to play a little bit of will, maybe some nickel, kind of a versatile player in the defense. What a pick that was. You pair him up with a guy like Jacob Rodriguez in the middle of that defense and Chris Johnson at corner. Jeff Hafley's going to have some dudes. He's going to have some young pieces here on this defense to work with. And look, Malik Willis, like we talked about, for what they paid to get him, and considering the low risk, high reward nature of that deal, I think it was a great signing. So overall, this is the team that, look, they had a lot of holes to fill, but I think for one offseason, they've done a nice job for the most part.
Hit a bunch of doubles.
Yeah.
Singles and doubles. Singles and doubles.
Yeah. Yeah, and sprinkling, like we mentioned, a guy like Chris Bell and a couple of these guys later that could turn out to be home runs. You have to kind of like what they're doing here, what they did in the draft especially.
Right. So real quick before we get out of here, Caden Proctor has been moved to guard also. So we have 2 players that have been taken before the best guard in Ione was taken at 14 by the Ravens. I don't understand. Listen, I said this the whole time. All these tackles that are the guys pushed up, we'll see how Spencer Fanu holds up. But all these guys are guards, and that's exactly, they drafted them, and they're moving them right aside. And Caden Proctor is a huge guy. He's 6'7". He's Mekhi Becton at guard, basically, for the most part. So we'll have to see how that works out there. Before we get out of here, Brad, I have one question for you. Stephon Diggs was found not guilty by the case by the young woman that was taking him to court. Do you see him? No, let me ask a question. Where do you see him signing this year if he gets a chance?
There's 3 teams that jump out. the LA Chargers, the 49ers, if they can maneuver the cap, and keep an eye on the Chiefs.
Okay, so you expect him to go to a winning team.
I wouldn't be shocked because the three teams that I mentioned are all teams that aren't afraid to be aggressive because they all feel like they're in the contender category, right? Now I know the Chargers haven't made a deep playoff run or anything like that recently, but they're a good football team. And they're a team that probably feels like, a couple key additions maybe pushes them into contender status. The Niners, we know, have been a very competitive football team for years now. They probably feel like, look, they're in an arms race in their own division with the Rams and the Seahawks. So that's a team that has never really been afraid to be aggressive. And I look at a team like the Chiefs. Look, they addressed the defense this offseason heavily, but that wide receiver room still doesn't look very scary at all.
Right.
And, you give a guy like Mahomes, a veteran guy who can stretch the field, that would be pretty appealing, I think, for a guy like Andy Reid. And we know Andy Reid is not afraid of off the field issues or character concerns. He's really not very afraid to take some risks on those types of players as far as bringing them into the locker room. So those are teams that I would circle first.
Okay. I guess we'll find out more on Stephon Diggs now that he's cleared of this. I think things will start to speed up, but it'll also be interesting, and we could talk about it another time, to see him versus Tyreek Hill and where Tyreek Hill is in his rehabilitation. Which one of these guys do you want? But we'll talk about that at another time.
Look, guys, that's going to do it for today's episode. Do us a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, that follow button, so you don't miss any future episodes. Once again, I'm Brad Fowler. He's Alex Higdon. This is Pint Glass Football, and we'll catch you next time.